The cabin wasn't perfect. The floor creaked when the wind blew too hard, the chimney whistled like a ghost in the middle of the night, and the old tin roof leaked during heavy snow. But to Tessa, this crooked little cabin, half buried in frost, surrounded by nothing but pine trees and silence, was more of a home than any place she had ever known. It sat off a narrow dirt path that hadn't seen a car in weeks. No electricity, no neighbors, no road signs. It was the kind of place people drove past on maps without ever realizing it existed, but Tessa didn't want to be found, not by anyone. She had arrived here months ago with little more than a backpack, a box of tea, and a soul worn thin by too many closed doors. No one knew she was here. No friends, no coworkers, no ex-foster parents, not even the woman at the shelter who used to smile at her shift after shift. And that's how she wanted it. Each morning, she woke to silence so complete she could hear her heartbeat echo through the cabin walls. She'd lace her boots with stiff fingers, pull on 3 layers of sweaters, and make her way outside to check the woodpile or collect clean snow to melt on the stove. She kept her movements slow, quiet, because if she moved too fast, if she dared to feel something too deeply, the past would catch up. Her days were filled with small, repetitive rituals. Sweep the floor, chop more wood, brew tea, mend the torn curtain, reread the same pages of a worn paperback until the words blurred. But it brought her comfort. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was something that felt safe. And for a girl like Tessa, safety had always been a luxury. She had never truly known what home meant, not when her mother packed up and vanished in the middle of the night. Not when she bounced from foster home to foster home, each one colder than the last, each promising stability only to deliver suspicion, disappointment, or subtle neglect. And certainly not when she opened her heart to the wrong people, only to be left bruised, used, and abandoned once more. Tessa had spent years learning not to need anyone, not their warmth, not their lies, not their fleeting version of love. And so she had built this life like a fortress. A cabin surrounded by miles of snow and trees, no expectations, no intrusions, no danger. Here, the quiet wasn't emptiness, it was armor. Sometimes, on rare nights when the fire crackled just right and the snow fell without sound, Tessa would sit by the small window, watching her reflection blur against the glass. And for just a moment, she'd imagine what life might have been if someone had stayed, if someone had fought for her. If someone, anyone, had knocked on a door for her instead of leaving her on the other side. But she never let those thoughts linger long. She couldn't afford to, because longing led to hope. And hope, she had learned the hard way, was just another word for disappointment with a pretty bow. She poured herself another cup of tea, the steam rising slowly in the dim cabin light, and wrapped herself in an old flannel quilt. Outside, the snow was falling thicker now, blanketing the world in white. Tessa leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. She had survived another day. Alone, yes, but safe. And then, knock, knock, knock. 3 sharp thuds against the wooden door. Not the wind, not an animal, not her imagination. Her eyes flew open, her body froze. No one was supposed to be here. No one should have known she was here. Her hands trembled around the mug. The fire hissed. The wind howled louder, but the knock had been real, firm, uneven, urgent. Tessa stood slowly, breath shallow. The cabin wasn't supposed to have visitors, but the past never asks permission. And that night it came back wrapped in snow, soaked in silence, and knocking on her door. The wind howled like a wounded animal. It slammed against the wooden walls of the cabin, rattled the shutters, and crept in through the cracks with icy fingers. The temperature had dropped so fast, the air inside the cabin felt brittle, as if it could shatter if she breathed too loudly. Tessa pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders, staring at the dancing shadows cast by the fire. Outside, the world was white noise, a storm so violent that no living thing should have been out there. She told herself it was nothing. The storm would pass, the door had creaked before, she was safe. And then, knock, knock, knock. 3 sharp, uneven thuds. Not like knuckles, like a fist, ragged, desperate. Tessa's blood turned cold, her breath caught. She waited. 1 second. 2. Another knock, this time softer, as if whatever was on the other side was starting to fall. She stood up slowly, her legs trembling, her heart thudding so hard it echoed in her ears. Each step toward the door felt like a mile. The wind roared, the fire popped. The whole cabin seemed to hold its breath with her. She reached the door. Frost had already begun to form around the edges of the handle. Through the fogged window pane, she could barely make out a shape, slumped, still, almost swallowed by the snow. She hesitated for half a second, then pulled the door open. The wind exploded inside, snow spiraling in like a scream. And then the man collapsed into her arms. He was heavy, soaked through, frozen, barely conscious. His skin was pale blue, his beard thick with icicles, and above his eye was a deep gash crusted over with blood and ice. He didn't say a word. Tessa dropped to her knees, dragging him over the threshold with a strength she didn't know she had. The door slammed shut behind them. She didn't have time to think, didn't have time to panic. Someone was dying in her arms. The man was ice, not just cold, but lifeless cold. His clothes were soaked stiff from the storm. His hands curled like frozen claws, fingertips bruised purple. His boots cracked at the seams, the laces half torn. Tessa dragged him closer to the fire, her muscles trembling, her breath shallow and sharp. Each second felt like an hour. She peeled off his coat first, then his soaked flannel shirt. Layer after layer, revealing skin so pale it looked almost translucent under the flickering firelight. Still, no words, no name, just a low moan when the heat finally reached his bones. Tessa's nursing instincts kicked in. She checked his pulse, barely there. She touched his forehead, burning beneath the frost. Then she reached for his wrist and froze. Right below the crease of his palm, under the raw, reddened skin, was a birthmark. Not just any birthmark. A maple leaf. Small, sharp-edged, dark. Exactly like hers. Exactly. Her own hand snapped back like she'd been burned. No, it couldn't be. She yanked back the sleeve of her sweater, exposing her own wrist. There it was. The same mark. The same shape. As if the two had once been carved from the same soul. Her throat tightened, her vision blurred. What was this? A coincidence? No, not in a storm like this. Not here. Not him. She looked at the man again, this stranger who'd fallen into her world like a ghost, and felt the ground shift beneath her. He stirred, and through cracked lips barely louder than the crackling fire, he whispered one word, a name. Tessa. Tessa. The name slipped from his mouth like a ghost breaking through ice, soft, rough, familiar in the most terrifying way. She dropped the tin cup in her hands. It hit the wooden floor with a clang and rolled into the shadows near the hearth, steaming tea trailing behind like blood. Her heart seized. That name, her name, she hadn't heard it spoken like that in 20 years. Not by a stranger, not by him. No one here knew her real name. She had gone by initials at the clinic. Used fake names for rental forms, mail paperwork, anything that let her keep her past locked away. She wasn't Tessa anymore. She was just someone surviving. And yet, he said it, exactly the way she remembered it being said when she was little. Soft but steady, like a lullaby, like a promise. And suddenly, it wasn't just the snow melting around the fire. It was her Her throat tightened, her legs buckled. She had to grip the edge of the table just to stay standing. She stared at him. The stranger. The man half dead on her rug. The man with her birthmark. And the man who had just called her Tessa. He blinked slowly, lips cracked and trembling. The words seemed to tear their way out of him. I'm Thomas Ward. Time stopped. The sound of the fire faded. The storm outside went silent. The cabin, the walls, even her heartbeat, everything stood still. Tessa's knees buckled. She dropped to the floor like the air had been sucked out of her lungs. Thomas Ward. That name didn't belong to this moment. It belonged to dusty memories, to lost photographs and unanswered questions. Her father. The man she thought was dead. The man she thought had forgotten her. The man who had disappeared without a word 20 years ago. She stared at him, really looked. The frostbitten cheeks, the cracked lips, the tired eyes. And behind all that, the face she used to imagine in her dreams. But dreams didn't bleed. Dreams didn't shiver. Dreams didn't collapse on your cabin floor and whisper your name like a prayer. Her voice cracked. No, you're not. You can't be. But he just looked at her, soft, shaking, certain. Tessa. His voice broken as it was carried years of longing in a single breath. She didn't remember standing up, didn't remember running. Only that she was in the bathroom door, locked hands pressed against her face, her entire body trembling. And still his voice echoed, Thomas, her father, alive. She sat on the cold tile floor, knees hugged to her chest, breath shallow and fast. The room was quiet, but inside her, everything screamed. 1,000 versions of herself shouted at once. The girl who cried herself to sleep, the teenager who stared out bus windows hoping for a face she couldn't remember. The woman who stopped hoping because it hurt too much. Now he was here, Thomas, her father. But was it really him? And if it was, what did that mean? She closed her eyes and the memory came back like a wave crashing through ice. A log cabin, not this one, but another, smaller, warm, safe. The scent of pine and firewood, a man with large hands and tired eyes holding her up on his shoulders as she laughed into the wind. He carved something with a pocket knife. His hands steady, careful. A small wooden bear, upright, with tiny ears and stubby arms. She named him Buttons, even though he didn't have any. She remembered pressing the bear to her lips when she was scared, remembered hiding it under her pillow. She hadn't seen that bear in years, hadn't seen him in years, and now he was lying on her floor. Tessa blinked, heart racing. Do I hug him or throw him back into the storm? This was the man whose name had been erased from every document. The man she was told was dead. The man no one ever looked for. But she did. As a child, she looked everywhere for any sign, any clue, any shadow of the man who once lifted her up to see the stars through the cabin window. She had wanted him to come back, but not like this, not broken, not hunted, not unknown. Tessa pressed her palms to her face, tears hot behind her eyes. What do you do when someone finds you long after you've stopped looking for them? She didn't know. She just knew the question had never left her. She'd just buried it deep enough to forget she still needed the answer. Tessa learned early that people leave. Some left quietly, a packed suitcase in the middle of the night. Some slammed doors. Some simply stopped showing up. She stopped keeping track. After her mother disappeared, the system swallowed her whole. Child welfare, group homes, foster care. She bounced from one place to another like a piece of mail no one had signed for. No one kept her long. She was too quiet, too strange, too watchful. One foster mom called her ice-hearted. Another said she had trouble attaching. A third just whispered, "She doesn't cry. That's not right." But Tessa cried, just not in front of them. She cried into pillows, into empty lockers, into her own cupped hands in bathrooms no one bothered to clean. And every time she packed up her things, what little she had, she told herself it wouldn't matter. That she didn't want to stay anyway. But it did matter, because every place she left a scar. And soon, she started leaving first. She ran, first with bags, then with nothing, shelters, basements, abandoned buses, a friend's couch for 2 nights before the friend's mother called the police. She learned to keep things small, pack fast, speak less, trust no one. Tessa didn't grow up with a home. She grew up trying to survive without one. It started with a smile in church. Tessa didn't usually attend Sunday service, but that day something drew her in. A chill in the air, a whisper in the soul, who knows? She sat in the last pew beside an old woman in a threadbare coat. Her name was Nancy. They exchanged pleasantries. The woman was kind, gentle. She talked about her son Derek, recently laid off, struggling to care for a sick cousin. They were staying in a noisy, cramped apartment. Tessa felt that familiar ache inside her chest. That old reflex to fix what's broken, to help. Before she could stop herself, the words were out. "Why don't you stay with me for a while?" Nancy's eyes filled with tears. She gripped Tessa's hands, whispered, "God bless you." That night, Nancy and Derek moved in. At first, it was okay. Nancy baked cornbread, brought crocheted doilies. Derek was quiet, polite. But then, the changes came. Derek began coming home late. He smelled like cheap whiskey. He started making comments. Slurred, inappropriate. "Pretty girl like you shouldn't live alone." His eyes never smiled. Then one night, Tessa found him standing in her bedroom doorway, swaying, just staring. When she asked what he was doing, he chuckled. "Thought I heard something." Nancy brushed it off. "Men get jumpy," she said. "He's under stress. Show grace." So Tessa started locking her door at night, but that didn't stop what came next. More men, strangers. Derek's friends loud, drunk sleeping on the floor. One passed out in the hallway, blocking her path to the bathroom. Tessa said something. Nancy smiled and said, "Sweetheart, what happened to your kind heart?" Guilt twisted inside her. Was she being ungrateful? No, but they made her feel like she was. Until the night Derek cornered her. The smell of sweat, cigarettes, and entitlement. He grabbed her arm, squeezed hard. "You owe us something, don't you?" She broke free. Locked herself in her room, shaking. Outside her door, he muttered threats for hours. The next morning, pancakes were on the table. Nancy was humming, like nothing had happened. It happened fast, too fast. One second, Tessa was in the kitchen washing a chipped mug. The next, Derek was behind her, his breath hot on her neck. His hand slammed the cabinet shut. "Why you been locking your door, Tess?" She froze. "I heard you talking to the neighbor yesterday." "Trying to get us kicked out?" "No," she whispered. "I wasn't." But his hand was already on her wrist. Then her throat, squeezing, hard. She gasped. Her legs kicked. Her fingers clawed for anything. Air, counter, salvation. His eyes were empty, dead. "You owe us," he hissed. "You don't get to just walk away." Tessa thought in that moment, this is how it ends. No lights, no screaming violin like in the movies. Just the fading kitchen tile and the smell of burnt coffee on the stove. And his final words before she blacked out, "No one's coming. No one will save you." But something inside her snapped. Not her bones, not her hope. Something deeper, survival. She reached blindly behind her, felt the cool steel of a butter knife, and jabbed. Not hard, but enough. He cursed, loosened his grip. She gasped, stumbled, ran to the front door, to the snow, to the freedom she almost lost forever. Some people show up when you're at your worst, and they don't ask what broke you. They just hand you a key. That was Catherine O'Hara. She wasn't family, she wasn't a friend, just a 78-year-old patient with liver failure who noticed the tired nurse with empty eyes. Tessa had been working double shifts at the hospital, barely eating, smiling through trauma, holding it all in. And yet, Catherine saw through it. "You remind me of someone," she said one night after her IV beeped. "My daughter, she didn't make it, but she had eyes like yours, always scanning the room, always bracing for something." Tessa didn't reply. She just tucked the blanket tighter around the frail woman's legs. But Catherine wasn't done. 2 weeks later, as she was being discharged into hospice, she reached into her old leather purse and pulled out a rusty cabin key. "This place is useless to me now," she said. "But it's safe, high in the mountains. No one bothers you there, not even ghosts." Tessa blinked. "Why are you giving this to me?" Catherine smiled, soft and tired. "Because I know the look of someone who's trying to disappear." And just like that, Tessa left the city. She didn't say goodbye to anyone. No forwarding address, no explanation. Just the road, the snow, and the hope that this time she'd vanish into peace, not fear. The cabin smelled of dust, pine wood, and something long forgotten. Tessa opened the creaky door, heart pounding like someone might leap out and drag her back to the city. But there was only silence and the soft whisper of wind through the pines. Inside, everything was old but solid. There was a wood-burning stove, a rust-stained sink, and a mattress that sagged in the middle. But it was hers. No locks on the outside, no footsteps in the hallway, no keys jingling at midnight. No yelling behind the walls, just stillness. She scrubbed for hours, cleaning grime from the windows, sweeping out mouse droppings, patching the roof with plastic sheets and duct tape. Then she lit the fire. And that night, for the first time in nearly 20 years, Tessa slept without fear. No shoes by the bed, no escape plan in her journal, no knives tucked under the pillow, only the firelight flickering on the ceiling. And her chest rising and falling like she wasn't preparing for battle anymore. The next morning, she made oatmeal. She sat on the porch with a blanket around her shoulders and wrote, "Day 1. No one knows where I am. No one can find me. I think this is what freedom tastes like, oatmeal smoke and pine air." She didn't realize then this cabin wouldn't stay quiet forever, but for now, it was sanctuary. Tessa stood by the window, arms folded, eyes on the snow still falling outside. Thomas sat across the room, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea, silence thick between them. "I wasn't looking for you," he finally said. His voice cracked like the firewood he'd chopped earlier. "I didn't even know this was your place. I was just running." Tessa turned. "Running from what?" Her voice was flat, controlled. Thomas sighed, like he'd been carrying the weight of 10 winters. "You won't believe me. Try me." He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a weathered manila envelope. Inside, photographs, maps, typed reports, and one unmistakable word stamped in red: classified. "I worked with an infrastructure committee," he said. "Land acquisitions, federal zoning, routine until I noticed inconsistencies. Townships being bought up, forests leveled. Then I found evidence of bribes, offshore accounts, and names." He paused. "Names of people who were supposed to protect the public, high up." Tessa's breath caught. "They found out I knew. A week ago, they burned down my apartment. I lost everything." He stared into the flames of the fireplace. "I didn't even know I was heading here. Just drove away from death. And ended up at my door," she whispered. He met her gaze, eyes brimming. "Maybe the world is cruel, but maybe it gives you one last chance. And I took it." The fire crackled softly, casting amber light on the wooden walls of the cabin. Thomas sat hunched over the kitchen table, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders, hands still trembling, not from the cold, but from the weight of what he was about to say. Tessa watched him in silence, a bowl of hot soup untouched in her hands. Her eyes were sharp, suspicious, but curious. "Your wound," she finally said, "it's not just from the snow, is it?" Thomas exhaled long and slow. He looked up. "No, it's not." He rolled up the sleeve of his thermal shirt. A deep gash ran along his rib cage, poorly bandaged, oozing slightly. "They tried to kill me." The words hung in the air like fog. "I stumbled onto something, Tessa. I wasn't supposed to see it, but I did. Government zoning plans, false land seizures, off-the-record meetings. Then I found the money trail, bribes, shell companies, payouts routed through fake charities." He looked her in the eyes. "People at the very top, untouchable, and now they're trying to make sure I disappear." Tessa's grip tightened around the bowl. "So why come here?" He smiled weakly. "I didn't know it was you, not until I saw the maple birthmark, but somehow the road led me back to the one person I'd lost and never stopped loving." There was silence, and then Tessa whispered, "So this isn't just about family. This is about exposing the truth." Thomas nodded, eyes dark with burden. "And the truth has a cost." The soup had gone cold, but neither of them cared. Tessa sat across the table, hands clenched into fists in her lap. Her eyes scanned Thomas like she was trying to see into a man's soul, trying to figure out if this was still some elaborate lie, or a second chance. "You said they want you dead," she said finally, voice low. "So what are you going to do?" Thomas shrugged, a bitter smile flickering across his lips. "Die or run again. Same as always, right?" His words hit her like a memory. Run. That's all she'd ever done. From the system. From fake mothers. From predators behind polite smiles. From pain. Now she could run again. She could throw him out into the storm. She could vanish into the woods like she once did and never look back. But something in her wouldn't let her move. Something cracked. "I used to think survival meant disappearing," she whispered, "becoming invisible, cutting off the past like a gangrenous limb." Thomas didn't interrupt. He just listened, because he knew what that sounded like. He had done the same. "But maybe," she said, eyes locking on his, "maybe survival also means choosing to stay, to stand for something, even if it hurts." He blinked. "Are you saying?" She stood slowly, walked to the window. The snow hadn't stopped, but neither had her heartbeat. Tessa turned back. Her voice didn't shake. "I'm done running. This time, I fight." It took her 3 tries to dial the number. Her fingers were shaking, and not from the cold. She hadn't spoken to him in nearly 4 years, had promised herself she never would again. Victor Lane, ex-federal agent, the man who once told her, "If you're ever in real danger, don't scream, call me." She had laughed back then. She wasn't laughing now. The phone rang once, twice, then a familiar gravel-rough voice answered. "Tessa?" She didn't waste a second. "I need your help," she said quickly. "There's a man in my cabin, my father. He has documents, real evidence. We're being hunted." Silence. Then Victor's voice, lower now, serious. "What kind of evidence?" Tessa's eyes flicked to the leather satchel Thomas had carried in, locked tight. She hadn't dared open it yet. Classified files, names, photos, audio recordings. It's enough to blow up a county. Another pause. "Is your dad stable?" "He's wounded, cold but alive. He's telling the truth, Victor. I know it in my bones." Victor exhaled. It was the sound of a man switching modes from quiet exile to war ready. "Send me coordinates. Keep the lights off. I'll be there before dawn." Before he hung up, his last words made her blood chill. "If what you said is true, they'll kill to keep this buried." He didn't knock. At 4:17 a.m., the cabin door creaked open on its own. Tessa reached for the fireplace poker in fear until she saw the shadow step inside. Quiet, focused, calm. Victor Lane hadn't aged a day. Black coat, tactical boots, A steel briefcase handcuffed to his wrist. No words, just a nod. Thomas tried to sit up, wincing in pain. Victor kneeled beside him, unhooked the satchel, and slid the contents into his case without even looking surprised. Photos, signed contracts, wire transfers, voice recordings. Victor closed the case, stood, and finally said, "This is enough to burn a hole through Capitol Hill." Then he turned to Tessa. "You said you didn't want to be involved again. That ends now." 3 days later, the headlines exploded. 3 officials step down in corruption scandal. Federal task force executes surprise raids across 2 states. 1 missing warrant issued for Senator H.B. Jennings. Tessa watched it all on a flickering cabin TV. Her hands trembled, but not from fear this time, from something deeper. For the first time in her life, the truth was louder than the silence. The phone rang at noon, an unknown number. Tessa stared at it for a moment before answering. "Miss Ward, this is Officer Beckett from the Portland District. We have new information about Nancy and Derek." Her heart skipped. "We understand you were previously under their care. Given recent updates, would you like to press charges?" There it was. A chance. Justice served cold. The kind she'd fantasized about on sleepless nights. But she looked around the cabin. Her father asleep on the rocking chair. The sun melting through the windows. The fireplace humming low. And for once, she felt light. She raised the phone again. Her voice was steady, calm. "No, I don't want to press charges." A pause. "Are you sure?" "Yes. They have their own lives to face. I'm not going back for what they owe me. I'm moving forward for what I owe myself." Click. And just like that, the past lost its grip. The snow melted slowly that spring. Each drip from the rooftop echoed like a heartbeat, steady, present, alive. Tessa stood barefoot in the cabin kitchen, her sleeves rolled up, dusted with flour. Across from her, Thomas fumbled with a rolling pin, failing miserably at flattening dough. They laughed, really laughed, not the kind that hides pain, the kind that means we're still here. The days became rhythm. Mornings, tea, soft jazz, sunrise pouring through the wooden slats. Afternoons, fixing cracks, stacking logs, painting shutters green. Evenings, warm bread, shared books, and conversations that didn't fear silence. She had scars, so did he, but the silence no longer haunted. It healed. For the first time, the cabin wasn't a hiding place. It was a home. He still called her Tessa. Not like a habit, not like a placeholder. He said it like it meant something, like it was sacred, like it saved him. "Tessa, pass me the wrench. Tessa, you still hum when you're nervous. Tessa, thank you for letting me come back." And every time he said it, a part of her stood taller. A crack in her soul closed just a little. A wound stitched itself, not with thread, but with love. She had hated her name once. It reminded her of loneliness, of abandonment, of being unwanted. But now it meant belonging. Now, Tessa was a word that could build a home. Every time she heard it, she smiled, because now she was truly herself. Thomas started carving again, not because he had to, but because it brought peace. His hands, once trembling from hiding and running, were now steady, shaping tiny animals out of cedar and pine. A chubby owl with one eye bigger than the other, a bear with stubby legs that couldn't stand, a moose that looked more like a potato with antlers. And yet they laughed, together, because it wasn't about perfection, it was about presence. Meanwhile, Tessa found a purpose she didn't know she still needed. A small rural clinic in Helena had a job opening for a nurse. At first, she hesitated. Was she ready to be seen again? But the first time someone called her Miss Tessa, something inside her clicked. She was no longer invisible. She treated cuts, checked blood pressure, sat beside lonely grandmothers and frightened children. She wasn't just healing them. She was healing the part of herself that never got that care. And every evening she'd return to the cabin where a crooked owl and a smiling father waited by the fire. We lost each other once, lost in the noise of life, in the silence of absence, in the shadows of mistakes and time. But in the heart of a raging snowstorm, at the edge of the world, where the trees stand silent witnesses and the stars hide behind heavy clouds, we found each other again. Not with a grand reunion, nor a flood of words, but with a flickering fire, a shared breath, and a name spoken like a prayer, Tessa. That name carried all the weight of years, all the pain and all the hope, all the memories buried deep beneath frozen ground. The flames danced softly, casting long shadows that stretched like bridges between past and present. Outside, the wind howled with relentless fury, but inside the cabin there was warmth, not just from the firewood burning low, but from a healing that began inside two wounded souls. For the first time in her life, Tessa felt something she hadn't known for so long: wholeness. Not perfection, not a flawless fairy tale, but a quiet, steady belonging. A promise whispered by the crackling fire that no matter how far we wander or fall, there is always a way back to home, if only we dare to listen to a name and let it guide us through the storm. She looked out the window, watching the snow blanket the world in silence, and for the first time, the silence wasn't empty. It was full of possibility, because every ending is just a beginning waiting to unfold. Life isn't about how many times you fall or how deep the storm gets. It's about finding the strength to stand back up, to face the cold, and to trust in the warmth of new beginnings. Sometimes the past feels like a shadow you can never escape, but healing starts the moment you stop running and start embracing your own story. Remember, you are not defined by your scars, but by the courage to heal them. Your name, your story, your life are yours to reclaim. If Tessa's journey teaches us anything, it's this: no matter how lost you feel, there's always a way home. Sometimes it begins with just one word. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of your own strength, join us on Through Her Eyes, a place where real stories inspire real change. Subscribe now and never miss a journey of hope, courage, and truth, because every story deserves to be seen, and every voice deserves to be heard.